In the desert, thirst does not begin when the last drop is gone. It begins hours earlier when the body starts spending water faster than it can replace it. On a summer morning in the 19th century Southwest, a small Apache scouting party discovered that riders were moving behind them. The nearest dependable spring lay in the wrong direction. Reaching it would expose their trail and might lead the pursuers directly to the water. Ahead stretched a country of stone, thorn, and heat. The scouts carried only a limited supply. They could turn toward the spring and risk being intercepted, or cross the dry country and trust knowledge that outsiders often fail to see. They chose the desert. For the next 3 days, every movement would be controlled by one question. How could they preserve enough water to remain alert, keep moving, and reach safety before their bodies began to fail? The deserts and dry uplands of the Southwest were not empty. They contained trails, seasonal water, edible plants, sheltered canyons, and signs left by animals. But these resources were scattered, changeable, and easy to miss. A traveler who treated the landscape as featureless could die while passing close to moisture he never recognized. Apache communities lived across varied environments, and their practices differed by place, season, and group. Knowledge of water was not one secret trick. It was a system built from observation, memory, timing, and restraint. The first rule was to stop fighting the climate. The scouts did not continue riding at full speed beneath the rising sun. Speed might create distance from pursuers, but it would also increase sweating and exhaust the horses. The fastest route on a map was not necessarily the route that preserved life. They traveled during the cooler morning hours, using harder ground where possible. Before the heat became severe, they searched for shade in broken rock. A shallow overhang or the shadowed side of a canyon wall could reduce direct exposure. The difference between sunlight and deep shade was not comfort alone. It determined how quickly the body lost water. This was their first technique: move according to temperature, not impatience. During the hottest part of the day, the party became still. They did not waste energy building an elaborate shelter. They used the land, loosened only what was necessary for ventilation, and protected their heads and skin from direct sun. Even conversation was limited. Every unnecessary action increased heat production and demanded more water. Their second technique was disciplined drinking. They did not refuse water completely. A person who deliberately avoids drinking while water is available may become weaker sooner. But they also did not consume the entire supply during the first wave of thirst. The remaining water had to support judgment as well as movement. The scouts drank measured amounts during rest and before cooler travel periods. They watched one another for changes that the affected person might not recognize: confusion, unusual silence, stumbling, irritability, or loss of coordination. In extreme heat, judgment can fail before a traveler admits he is in danger. Their third technique was protecting the horses. The animals carried the men and equipment, but they also required water and rest. A horse pushed too hard might collapse before the party reached safety. The scouts reduced speed, selected firmer routes, and avoided forcing the animals through deep sand when a longer rocky line was available. They paid attention to breathing, sweat, movement, and willingness to continue. A horse was not treated as an unlimited machine. If the animals failed, the men would face the remaining distance on foot under the same sun. Their fourth technique was reading terrain as a record of water. Water follows gravity. Even after surface pools disappear, moisture may remain beneath sand or gravel in selected places. The scouts examined bends and washes, shaded canyon sections, rock basins, and places where runoff collected after storms. They did not dig randomly. Digging wastes energy and water from a body. They looked first for evidence that the effort might succeed. Vegetation offered clues, but no single plant guaranteed a drink. Greener growth in a protected drainage might suggest moisture below the surface. Trees or shrubs clustered along an otherwise dry channel could indicate that roots were reaching water. The scouts compared these signs with season, recent weather, soil, and the behavior of animals. Their fifth technique was following life without blindly following tracks. Animal trails often converged toward water, but they could also lead to feeding areas, shelter, or a source too small for horses. Birds moving at certain times might provide direction, yet birds can fly far and do not always travel directly. Insects near dusk could suggest moisture nearby. Fresh droppings and tracks indicated how recently animals had passed. The scouts used several signs together. One clue created a possibility. Several matching clues created a decision. As evening approached, the party resumed traveling. The temperature fell, but darkness introduced new hazards. Loose rock could injure a horse. A narrow canyon might conceal strangers. Losing the trail could cost more water than resting until moonlight improved. Their sixth technique was navigation from memory. Experienced travelers did not remember only a destination. They remembered sequences, a ridge shaped in a certain way, a wash that divided below dark cliffs, a stand of vegetation visible from one approach, and the distance between shaded resting places. This mental map allowed the party to move toward a lesser-known water location without crossing the most obvious routes. The first night passed without discovery. Before dawn, the scouts used a small portion of water and continued. Their supply was now dangerously low. By the second day, thirst was no longer an inconvenience. Mouths were dry. Muscles felt heavier. The horses needed more frequent rest. Heat seemed to press upward from the ground as well as downward from the sky. One scout began to slow. He answered questions correctly, but his movements had lost precision. The others changed his load and placed him where they could observe him. They did not allow pride to decide whether he needed help. A person who falls behind in dry country may force the entire group to spend more time and water recovering him. Their seventh technique was group discipline. The strongest did not race ahead while the weakest disappeared behind. Pace was set by what the party could sustain. Tasks were distributed. One man watched the back trail. Another searched the country ahead. Others monitored the horses and the struggling scout. Near sunset, they reached a dry channel that memory suggested should contain water. The ground showed signs of past flow, and vegetation was thicker along one bend. The scouts searched the shaded bank and began digging where dampness was most likely to remain. The first soil was hot and powdery. Below it came compact sand, then cooler material. Hope rose, but no water appeared. They dug farther, spending strength they could not replace. At last, the sand became slightly damp. A shallow seep formed, but so slowly that it could not immediately support several men and horses. Muddy water collected at the bottom, clouded by their work. This created a new danger. Desperate drinking could disturb the seep faster than it refilled. The horses, smelling moisture, became difficult to control. The scouts protected the small opening and waited. Sediment settled. Water entered gradually. They collected it in small amounts rather than allowing the animals to destroy the source. The first drink was not a feast. It was enough to stabilize the men and continue. But the seep did not solve their problem. It was too small, and tracks around it would reveal exactly where they had stopped. If pursuers reached the channel, the scouts could be trapped while waiting for more water. They left during the night. The eighth technique was never confusing a temporary resource with safety. By the third morning, clouds appeared over distant high ground, but they offered little shade. The struggling scout was more alert after the seep, yet the horses remained tired. The party had to reach a more dependable source before the next period of extreme heat. Then they found fresh tracks crossing their route. The prints belonged to several mounted riders. Their edges were sharp. The strangers had passed recently, moving toward the same canyon the scouts intended to use. The known water was now ahead, but so was possible danger. Turning back meant returning to the weak seep. Moving directly forward might place them in view of the riders. The party climbed only high enough to observe without appearing on the skyline. Far below, movement flashed near the canyon entrance. They were not alone. The scouts now depended on everything they had preserved. Because they had rested during the hottest hours, their horses could still move. Because they had rationed effort rather than simply refusing water, their judgment remained clear. Because they understood the drainage system, they knew that the main canyon was not the only place where moisture might collect. One scout remembered a narrow side channel hidden behind a dark rock face. It was longer and difficult for horses, but runoff sometimes remained in shaded stone basins there. The party changed direction without crossing the open floor. They entered broken ground, leading the horses through sections where riding would risk injury. The heat returned. Their remaining water was finished. At midday, the weakened scout stumbled and dropped to one knee. The men moved him into a thin strip of shade. They cooled him without wasting movement, redistributed his equipment, and waded through the most dangerous heat. The riders near the main canyon might discover their earlier trail at any moment. Yet forcing the scout forward now could kill him. Late in the afternoon, they continued into the side channel. The rock walls narrowed. Shade covered part of the floor. At first, the stone basins were empty, holding only dust and wind-blown leaves.